We should be concerned about the prevalence of cardiovascular disease and diabetes because both the diseases are the major causes of disability and mortality. So there are several interrelationships between atherosclerosis and insulin resistance. And if you look at all the different risk factors, from hypertension to obesity, hyperinsulinemia, diabetes, high levels of triglycerides in your blood. Even if you have normal levels of LDL, you can have small dense LDL particles which are more atherogenic, low HDL, which is another risk factor, and hypercoagulability. So we have to be concerned about all these risk factors because it connects insulin resistance and atherosclerosis. If you look at the prevalence of diabetes in India itself, it has gone up very significantly. And also you will find there's a lot more obesity in India. And these two conditions, these two diseases are related. I call obesity a disease as well. 80% of the people who get type 2 diabetes have a problem with overweight. And as Indians, we should be even more concerned because if compared to Caucasians, at even normal BMIs, which is the body mass index, we have more body fat, which makes us more insulin resistant, and we have a higher prevalence of diabetes. Next one. One of the things that you can monitor for yourselves is the waist circumference. So both the waist circumference and body weight are very important risk factors. So it's, if you, and also at any given level of obesity, which means taking into consideration BMI and the waist circumference, we are the higher risk compared to Caucasians. So if you plan to go home and take out your measuring tape and measure yourself, you cannot compare it to the charts which are set up for Americans, because the cut points for an American woman has to be less than 35 inches, and for an American male, less than 40 inches. But for Indians, it's a whole different story. Look at the cut points for South Asians. For males, it has to be less than 35.4 inches, and for females, less than 31.5 inches. At different levels of obesity, we call it the body mass index, which takes into consideration your height as well as your weight. And as the weight increases, you see the prevalence of more diseases. And even if you find that, the cut points for Americans, like 25 to 29.9 is overweight, and 30 to over 30 is different levels of obesity. But for Indians, our risk really for diabetes increases at a BMI of 22. So we have to be even more careful and not just go by these charts which say it's okay to be at a BMI of 24. It's already, we may look normal, but we are metabolically obese. So the different causes, when you think of the metabolic syndrome, it really means you can have high blood pressure, high blood glucose levels, large waist circumference, low HDL, high triglycerides. So it could be any three of them that would classify a person to have the metabolic syndrome. So the different causes would be, what we can look into is the acquired lifestyle, just being overweight and obese, physically inactive, eating lots of carbohydrates, lots of sugars, lots of grains, even if they're grains, and particularly if they are just refined flour. And also high-fat diets, particularly diets that are high in saturated fats and trans fats. And there are genetic causes as well. So just to keep into mind that if you have any three of these risk factors, then you can be classified as having the metabolic syndrome. So in order to manage this and to keep it under control, think of your weight, make sure you're physically active, and of course the therapy is directed against specific risk factors. There are recommendations for nutrition, and what you see here is a whole bunch of percentages. You know, it's very difficult to understand what does it mean when you say eat less than 7% saturated fat and not more than 1% trans fat. Or you say you can have 50 to 60% of your calories from carbohydrate. So we really need to translate it. I mean, can you figure this out? When I tell you just go and eat less than 7% saturated fat, do you think you could figure that out, what it means? So we really have to convert it into foods, you know, what we typically eat. And coming from different parts of India, we are used to different kinds of ethnic cuisines, and so we need to tailor it to people who come from either Chennai or come from Trivandrum or come from New Delhi or come from Lucknow. So we have to make sure that we can design eating patterns that would be suitable for them, because we need to make sure people enjoy them. You can't take the enjoyment out of food. We need to enjoy food, but we need to also eat healthily. Next slide, please. So let's look at some of the fats that we typically consume, depending on which part of India we come from. You know, if you look at coconut oil or coconut milk, it's extremely high in saturated fat. It's at this end. The red denotes that it's a saturated fat and it's not good for us. Saturated fat is very potent in raising the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol. And if you have too much of trans fat, like the vanaspati, the dalda, the Crisco, then we are also not only raising the LDL cholesterol, but we can also lower the HDL cholesterol, which is a good cholesterol. So there are also these plant fats, and not all of them are good for us. There's palm oil, palm kernel oil. Those are also high in saturated fat. And then on the other extreme, you have safflower oil, canola oil, almond oil, etc. Those are high in unsaturated fats. So these can be incorporated in your diet, but you have to remember a calorie is a calorie. So it doesn't mean just because olive oil is a better kind of a fat, better quality of fat, that you can pour in as much as you want. You can't do that, because every gram of fat you consume, it's 9 calories. So if you add an extra teaspoon of olive oil to your food, it's an extra 45 calories. And if you're eating 45 calories more than what you need, then you're going to gain about, and if you do that every single day, you will gain 4.5 pounds in a year. So you do have to be very careful in the amount of all the foods that do contribute calories, including even the good kinds of fats. There are advantages to having certain fats like flaxseed, adding flaxseed to the food, or you can use chia seeds. You know what chia seeds are? Does anybody know? The term I think used in the south, and also it's called sabza. You just soak them in water and it sort of plumps up, it looks like caviar. But it's used in some preparations, and it's high in what's called alpha-linolenic acid, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. Typically, Indians have low levels of alpha-linolenic acid, as well as the marine sources that you get from salmon and mackerel. That's called the eicosapentaenoic acid and the docosahexaenoic acid. I'm sure you've heard of omega-3 fatty acids. So there are plant sources and marine sources. And if you're a vegetarian, it's very hard then to get enough omega-3s in your diet. So you can use flaxseed, but you have to make sure you grind it. And you can use a coffee grinder to grind it, and then keep it in your refrigerator. Make sure you date it, so you don't keep it in it for too long, not more than a month. Because it's highly unsaturated, it gets oxidized. So when you have oxidized fat, that's not good for you either. It also can cause the LDL to get oxidized, and oxidized LDL is very atherogenic, which means can grow to cause atherosclerosis. So so when you can change. So when you think of what are the kinds of, the saturated fats, what should I look for? People, when you consume meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy, like even the ghee is clarified butter, so it is from a dairy, it's a dairy product. Most of the fat comes from these sources. Then if you have, even grains, you take whole wheat flour, but if you make paratha out of it and you put ghee on it, it's like having a heart attack on a plate. Because you put so much of ghee or butter, and people associate adding ghee and butter to being affluent, because they say, oh, I've been to parties in New York where they would have this wonderful platter of spinach and then put a couple of sticks of butter on it. And you sort of fight to get away from the butter when it's there. It's already there and it's melting away and getting into your arteries. So it's very important to, if you have a dry pulka, it's fine, but if you're going to fry your puris and you're going to make paratha and then add more butter on it to make it delicious, then you're consuming more saturated fat. Because butter is over 60% saturated fat. So it's a lot of saturated fat that's not good for us. Next slide. Then trans fat. I get very concerned when I go to some of the Indian stores and the shelves are full of wonderful gurku and pale and all those tasty things. But did you know that 1 ounce of pale or mixture, one of the hot mixes, has about 170 calories. And it has about 11 grams of fat, over 2 teaspoons of fat. And 1 ounce is a very small amount. I mean, nobody gets satisfied just eating 1 ounce of it. You want to eat like 8 ounces of it. And that one packet, the little packet is 14 ounces. So you go figure the math. 170 by 14, that's the number of calories you're consuming. And of course, you're going to add all those wonderful chutneys to it to give you even more calories and more carbohydrate in it. But this is the way we eat all those little snacks before dinner and pile up on calories, and also the kind of trans fat. So I deliberately put in, when you eat cakes and cookies and crackers and pies, we're also eating kale and gurkus and all those hot mixes that's full of trans fat. A lot of them use hydrogenated shortening. So if you see the word partially hydrogenated oils, that is a red flag. That means it is very high in trans fatty acid, and what it does, it raises your bad cholesterol, the LDL, and it lowers the good cholesterol, that's the HDL. So have you heard of the DASH diet? Yeah, anybody here? Yeah, I see some people nodding. Yeah, DASH actually is the acronym for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And this eating pattern has been studied very well, and this diet really has lots of vegetables and fruits, 9 to 11 servings per day. So you may wonder, how am I going to eat 9 to 11 servings of vegetables and fruit? Half a cup of cooked spinach is 1 serving. So, you can easily eat a cup. And eating a banana is like 2 servings, or a large apple is 2 servings. So it's not very difficult if you knew what the portion size is. But this diet gives you all these nutrients like potassium and magnesium and calcium. And it emphasizes, again, as I said, lots of vegetables, whole grain, very small amount of poultry without skin, a little bit of fish. It also emphasizes nuts. Nuts can be particularly good for vegetarians who don't get enough protein. If you eat an ounce of almonds, it's like eating an egg.